Deep within the shadowy expanse of the forgotten Timberwild Forest, where the sun rarely pierced the towering canopy, an extraordinary encounter was about to unfold, one that would test the limits of courage, compassion, and the unspoken bond between man and beast. As the morning fog clung to the mossy ground and birds whispered their songs from high branches, a lone traveler named Edrin made his way through the dense woods. Edrin was a rugged, silent man known among the scattered villages as a wanderer. With a leather satchel slung over his shoulder and a weathered map in hand, he ventured where few dared, seeking solitude from a world that had long abandoned him. But, on this fateful day, solitude would be shattered in the most unexpected way. A sudden rustling broke the serenity of the forest. Edrin stopped, eyes narrowing, his hand instinctively reaching for the small hatchet strapped to his belt. From the thicket, not 20 paces ahead, emerged a massive figure, a bear, but not like any bear Edrin had ever seen. The creature's fur, thick and once a proud shade of golden brown, was now matted with blood and dirt. A deep gash ran along its shoulder, and every step seemed to rack its body with agony. Its breaths came in heavy, labored huffs, and its dark eyes, usually fierce and untamed, held something else. Something Edrin could hardly believe. Fear. No, not fear. Desperation. Edrin stood frozen. The bear, towering and broken, stared right into his soul. Then, to his utter shock, the beast did not charge or roar. Instead, it took a faltering step forward and let out a low, guttural moan, not of anger, but of unbearable pain. And then, it did something that would haunt Edrin forever. It lowered its massive head, as if in surrender, and collapsed onto its haunches. Edrin's pulse thundered in his ears. "What kind of creature are you?" he whispered to himself, torn between fear and an inexplicable pull to help. He took a cautious step forward. "Easy, big one. I won't hurt you," Edrin murmured, his voice softer than he'd thought possible. The bear's ears twitched, acknowledging his presence, but it made no move to rise or attack. It merely watched him, eyes filled with a pleading glimmer that stirred something deep inside the solitary traveler. Memories of his past flooded him, memories of his own pain, of nights spent in the wilderness, tending to his own wounds, isolated from the world. Could it be that this mighty creature was now as broken and alone as he had been? Gathering his courage, Edrin edged closer. From this distance, he could see the extent of the bear's injuries, deep claw marks, as if from a brutal battle with another beast, and a crude arrow still embedded in its thick hide. His heart clenched at the sight. What had this bear endured to end up like this? "I'm going to help you," Edrin whispered, more to himself than the bear. He slowly set his pack down and began rummaging for anything that could aid the creature. Some herbs he had gathered, a flask of water, pieces of cloth. As he worked, Edrin noticed something strange, a crude leather collar half buried beneath the bear's thick fur. It was worn and broken, but there, etched into the leather, was a single word: Branok. Edrin's brow furrowed. Branok. You had a name? Someone owned you. The bear, as if recognizing its name, let out a low groan, shifting its weight in the dirt. Edrin's mind raced. Who would dare to collar such a majestic creature? What had Branok endured at the hands of men? He carefully approached Branok's side, murmuring soothing words as he examined the arrow. "This will hurt, my friend, but it needs to come out." As Edrin reached for the arrow, Branok tensed, a deep growl rumbling from his throat. But the man held his ground, locking eyes with the beast. "Trust me." With a swift, steady hand, Edrin yanked the arrow free. Branok roared in pain, the sound echoing through the forest, scattering birds from the treetops. But he did not strike out. Instead, he slumped lower, panting, as if relieved to have the foreign object gone from his body. Edrin quickly cleaned the wound with water and pressed herbs to the gash, binding it as best he could with strips of cloth. All the while, Branok watched him with those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every gesture. Night began to fall, shadows lengthening across the forest floor. Edrin built a small fire, its warm glow casting dancing shapes on the trees. To his surprise, Branok did not wander off but lay near the fire, eyes half-lidded, exhausted from pain and blood loss. As they sat in silence, Edrin whispered, "Who did this to you, Branok? And why?" The bear made no answer, but in the flicker of the flames, Edrin thought he saw a story of cages and chains, of battles forced upon him for the amusement of cruel men, of a life lived in torment until the day he escaped, wounded and broken. Edrin's jaw tightened. "No one deserves that," he murmured. "Not man, not beast." And there, in the middle of Timberwild Forest, an unlikely bond was formed. A bond forged in shared pain and the quiet understanding of two souls who had both been abandoned by the world. Little did Edrin know, this was only the beginning of an incredible journey. The forces that had wounded Branok still hunted him, and soon they would come for them both. The night air grew colder, and as the fire crackled, Edrin pulled his cloak tighter. He watched Branok carefully, wondering how much more the bear could endure. The forest around them was alive with distant howls and the hoot of owls. But for now, a fragile peace hung between man and beast. As dawn painted the sky with streaks of amber and violet, Branok stirred. He struggled to his feet, swaying with the effort. Edrin rushed to his side. "Easy there, Branok. You're still weak." Branok's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, Edrin thought he saw something more, an understanding, a silent gratitude. But before Edrin could say another word, a sharp whistle cut through the trees. Branok's ears perked up, and a deep growl rumbled from his throat. Edrin stood scanning the woods. From the shadows, figures emerged. 3 men, rugged and cruel-looking, each armed with spears and crossbows. Leading them was a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, looks like someone found our prize," the man sneered. "Step away from the bear, stranger. He's ours." Edrin's hand instinctively moved to his hatchet. "He doesn't belong to anyone," Edrin said firmly. "Not anymore." The scarred man laughed. "You think you can stop us? Branok is worth more than you'd make in a lifetime. Fought in a dozen pits, he has. People pay good coin to see him tear beasts and men apart." Edrin's blood boiled. "And what did you pay him for his pain?" "Pain? He's just a beast," the man spat. "And if you don't move, you'll share his fate." Branok let out a deep growl, standing taller despite his wounds, moving closer, to Edrin's side like a guardian. The men raised their weapons. Edrin knew he couldn't fight them all, but he also knew he wouldn't abandon Branok. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." A tense silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and Branok's heavy breathing. Suddenly, the scarred man gave a signal, and the men lunged forward. Edrin braced himself, but before the first spear could strike, Branok roared, a sound so thunderous it shook the ground. Despite his injuries, Branok charged with terrifying strength, swiping at one of the men and sending him flying into a tree. Edrin fought alongside the bear, using his hatchet to block and parry. He dodged an arrow aimed for Branok and swung at the attacker, forcing him back, but there were too many. The scarred man aimed his crossbow at Branok, smirking as he took careful aim. "No!" Edrin yelled, rushing toward him. A sudden blur shot from the trees, a white wolf snarling and leaping straight at the man. The crossbow fired, but the bolt went wide as the wolf knocked the man to the ground. The other hunters panicked, and in moments they were either fleeing or lying unconscious. Edrin turned, panting, as the wolf stood by Branok, baring its teeth at the remaining enemies. Its fur gleamed in the dawn light, and its eyes were sharp and intelligent. Branok let out a soft grunt as if acknowledging an old friend. "You know him?" Edrin asked, bewildered. The wolf padded over to Edrin, studying him before nudging his hand, then turning back to Branok. From the forest edge, an old man stepped out, leaning on a staff. His long gray hair hung in braids, and his eyes were sharp and knowing. "Seems you've made a friend, traveler." Edrin turned to face him. "Who are you?" "Name's Galrin. Used to care for Branok before they took him. Before they made him into what you've seen." Edrin looked at Branok, then back at Galrin. "Why didn't you stop them?" Galrin's face hardened. "I tried. But they had power, and I was only one old man. But now, with you and Branok together, maybe we can put an end to it." Branok stood proudly, though still bleeding, as if understanding Galrin's words. Edrin felt a fire spark within him. "Then let's end it. Let's make sure they never hurt him. Or any creature again." Galrin nodded, and the wolf, whom he called Fenric, gave a soft howl as if in agreement. As the sun rose higher, casting golden rays through the trees, the unlikely group, man, bear, wolf, and elder, set out into the forest. Their battle was far from over, but together, they had a chance. As the group ventured deeper into Timberwild Forest, the air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. Branok lumbered alongside Edrin, his powerful form still moving with a limp, but steadier now, as if determination alone kept him upright. Fenric, the white wolf, prowled ahead, ears perked and eyes scanning for danger, while Galrin walked with surprising agility for an old man, his staff tapping rhythmically against the roots and rocks beneath their feet. Edrin couldn't help but glance at Galrin, curiosity burning within him. "Galrin, you said you used to care for Branok. What happened to him? How did they capture him?" Galrin's face darkened, deep lines etched from years of sorrow and hardship. "Branok was born free, king of this forest. But men came, poachers and slavers. Men who saw him not as a creature of beauty and strength, but as a tool for blood sport. They trapped him when he was young, broke his spirit with whips and chains, forced him to fight other beasts in pits, of mud and blood. I tried to stop them, but they had wealth, guards, and worse, dark magic that binds creatures to their will." Edrin's fists clenched. "And now they want him back?" Galrin nodded grimly. "Aye, they won't stop until they reclaim him, or see him dead." Fenric let out a low growl, as if sensing something in the wind. The group paused. Ahead, in a clearing bathed in pale sunlight, stood a figure. A woman, cloaked in dark emerald, with sharp eyes that seemed to gleam like a predator's. Her hand rested casually on the hilt of a dagger, and beside her stood a massive black hound, its red eyes glaring at Branok and Fenric. Galrin's voice was a mere whisper. "Velra, the huntress, one of the ones who captured Branok." Velra smiled coldly. "I was wondering when I'd catch up to you. Branok is worth a fortune. Did you think we'd let him go so easily?" Edrin stepped forward, standing between Branok and the woman. "He doesn't belong to you." Her smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Everything in these woods belongs to those strong enough to take it, and I always take what I want." At her signal, the black hound lunged forward, fangs bared. Fenric met it mid-leap, their bodies crashing together in a whirl of teeth and fur. Edrin drew his hatchet, readying himself as Velra advanced, dagger gleaming. But before she could strike, Branok roared, a sound that seemed to shake the trees themselves. He surged forward, his great paws swiping at the ground with force enough to send dirt and leaves flying. Velra faltered, eyes widening in momentary fear. Galrin raised his staff, muttering words in a language Edrin didn't understand. Vines shot from the ground, wrapping around Velra's feet, trying to hold her in place. She snarled and slashed at them, but they tangled tighter. Meanwhile, Fenric and the hound fought viciously, neither giving an inch. Edrin rushed to help, swinging his hatchet toward the hound, forcing it to dodge and giving Fenric the chance to bite deep into its leg. Velra, breaking free of the vines, glared at Edrin. "You think you can protect him? You know nothing of what's coming. Branok is more than a bear. He holds power you can't imagine. Power we need." Edrin's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll never have him." With a snarl, Velra threw a small black orb to the ground, and smoke billowed out, thick and choking. By the time it cleared, she was gone, only the sound of her hound limping away into the trees remaining. The group stood, catching their breath. Branok's sides heaved, but there was a new fire in his eyes, a defiance that hadn't been there before. Galrin looked at Edrin, nodding. You were brave to stand against her, but Velra won't stop, and if she's involved, others will follow. Edrin placed a hand on Branok's shoulder. Then we'll be ready. Galrin's gaze turned serious. We need to reach the hidden grove, my sanctuary. There, I can heal Branok fully, and we can prepare for what's to come. Fenric padded back to them, bloodied but alive, and gave a short bark, as if agreeing. Together they turned deeper into the forest, knowing the real battle was yet to come. But for now they had each other, and in that unity there was hope. As they ventured further into the heart of Timberwild, the trees seemed to grow taller, the shadows darker, and the air heavier with magic. Every step felt like a journey into the unknown, but Edrin, Branok, Galrin, and Fenric pressed on, driven by purpose and survival. Galrin took the lead now, his staff glowing faintly to light their way through winding paths few dared to walk. Branok limped close behind Edrin, his great head occasionally brushing the man's shoulder, a silent gesture of trust. Fenric, ever watchful, moved along the edges of their path, scanning for danger. The hidden grove isn't far now, Galrin murmured, glancing back. But we must move quickly. Velra may be regrouping, and if she calls the shadow hunters, even Branok may struggle to fight them off. Edrin nodded, tightening his grip on his hatchet. Tell me more about these shadow hunters. What are they? Galrin's eyes darkened. They are not mere men, twisted by dark magic, part beast, part shadow. They hunt in packs, and they never stop until their prey is caught or dead. If Velra summons them, she means to end this. A sudden crack of a branch made them freeze. Fenric growled low, his ears pinned back. From the mists ahead, shapes began to emerge. Hulking figures with glowing yellow eyes, half covered in shadow, their twisted forms resembling wolves and men combined. The shadow hunters had found them. Galrin raised his staff, shouting an incantation that caused the ground to tremble. Vines and roots burst from the earth, trying to ensnare the creatures, but the shadow hunters were fast, unnaturally fast. They leapt over the roots, claws gleaming in the dim light. "Stand behind me!" Galrin yelled, as he unleashed another wave of magic, hurling blasts of green fire at the attackers. Edrin stepped in front of Branok, weapon ready. "Not this time," he said under his breath. "I won't run." Branok, despite his wounds, let out a thunderous roar that echoed through the forest. The shadow hunters hesitated, their eyes flickering as if unsure whether to approach the mighty bear. But then, with a guttural howl, they charged. The battle was fierce. Edrin swung his hatchet, striking one of the creatures across the jaw, sending it sprawling. Fenric lunged at another, biting deep into its leg. Galrin's staff flashed and crackled, binding some of the shadow hunters in light, though not for long. Branok fought like a beast reborn, his massive paws swiping at anything that came close. He knocked one of the hunters aside, sending it crashing into a tree with a sickening crack. But still, more came, surrounding them. Just when it seemed the tide might turn against them, a loud whistle pierced the night air. From the trees, a group of cloaked figures emerged, bows drawn and ready. Arrows rained down upon the shadow hunters, striking true. The newcomers moved swiftly and with purpose, driving the beasts back. As the last of the shadow hunters fled into the darkness, one of the cloaked figures approached. Pulling back their hood, a woman with sharp eyes and long silver hair revealed herself. "Galrin, you old fool, what have you gotten yourself into this time?" Galrin chuckled despite his exhaustion. "Selene, it's good to see you." Selene's gaze shifted to Branok, her eyes softening slightly. "So, this is the bear everyone's whispering about. Looks like he's been through hell." Edrin stepped forward. "You know each other?" Galrin nodded. "Selene leads the forest wardens, protectors of Timberwild. If anyone can help us, it's her." Selene smiled faintly. "Let's get you to the grove. You've stirred a hornet's nest, old friend, and the whole forest will feel it. But maybe, just maybe, with Branok on our side, we have a chance." With that, the group set off once more, now larger, stronger, and with renewed hope as the dawn began to break over Timberwild. casting light on the path ahead. As dawn painted the skies in hues of gold and crimson, the expanded group made their way deeper into the forest. The forest wardens, led by Celine, moved with practiced ease through the dense undergrowth. Edrin glanced at them, noting their fluid movements, and realized these were no ordinary hunters. These were warriors bonded to the forest, protectors of all its creatures, and now, allies to their cause. Branok, though still wounded, seemed revitalized by the sight of more friendly faces. His massive form strode with a quieter resolve, and his keen eyes scanned the horizon with a spark of something that resembled hope. Fenric walked close to him, almost as if guarding the bear, occasionally glancing back at Edrin and Galrin, as if to ensure all were safe. As they pushed through a thicket, Celine raised her hand. "We're close," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "The grove is just beyond that ridge." They crested the hill, and before them lay a hidden valley bathed in soft light. Enormous trees circled the grove, their roots twisting like ancient serpents around shimmering pools of crystal-clear water. Flowers bloomed in shades unseen in the outer forest, and a faint mist hovered above the ground, giving the place an ethereal glow. Galrin sighed with relief. "Sanctuary," he murmured. The group descended into the grove, and as they reached its center, Celine gestured to a stone platform encircled by vines. "Lay Branok here. The magic of this place will help him." Edrin guided Branok gently to the platform. As soon as the bear settled, the vines around the stones began to glow faintly, and the pools of water rippled as if responding to Branok's presence. Celine approached Edrin. "You've risked much to bring him here. Tell me everything." Edrin took a deep breath and began recounting everything. How he had first found Branok wounded, how Velra had attacked them, and the battle with the shadow hunters. Celine listened intently, her silver eyes narrowing at the mention of Velra. "Velra has grown stronger than I feared," Celine muttered. "If she's calling shadow hunters, she's preparing for war." Galrin stepped in, leaning on his staff. "And she won't stop until she either enslaves Branok again or destroys him." Celine's jaw tightened. "Then we must stop her first." As night began to fall, the grove lit up with soft bioluminescence from the plants and trees. The wardens set up a perimeter, guards posted among the trees. Edrin sat beside Branok, watching as the bear's wound slowly closed under the grove's healing magic. Fenric lay at his feet, resting but alert. Celine joined him, sitting gracefully beside the bear. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "Branok is no ordinary bear." Edrin glanced at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "There's a legend among my people," she continued, "of a guardian spirit, the Great Bear, who once protected Timberwild. Some say Branok is that spirit reborn, or descended from him. His power runs deep, tied to the forest itself. That's why Velra wants him. She's after the magic that flows through his veins." Edrin looked at Branok in awe. "But he's suffered so much? Why would a guardian be left to suffer like that?" Celine shook her head. "Even guardians can fall. Even they can be broken by cruelty. But perhaps he found you for a reason. Perhaps he's ready to rise again." Their conversation was interrupted as one of the wardens rushed over. "Celine, there's movement in the forest. Scouts report torches, a large force approaching." Celine stood immediately, eyes flashing. "Velra is coming." Edrin rose to his feet. "Then we fight." Galrin joined them, his staff now glowing bright. "Not just fight, we protect Branok and the grove at all costs." Celine turned to her wardens. "Prepare the defenses, alert the spirits of the grove. Tonight we hold the line." The grove burst into action. Wardens took positions in the trees, knocking arrows and readying blades. Galrin and a few other mages began chanting, weaving protective wards into the air. Edrin stood by Branok's side, his hatchet gleaming in the moonlight. As the enemy drew near, the ground began to tremble under the march of armored feet. Velra herself emerged from the shadows, mounted on a great black stag with eyes like burning coals. At her side, the black hound limped but snarled viciously. Velra's voice rang out cold and sharp. "Give me the bear, and I will let the rest of..." You leave alive, refuse, and this grove will burn. Selene stepped forward, her bow drawn. You'll take nothing from this place, Velra? Velra laughed darkly. Then die with him. With a wave of her hand, the forest exploded into chaos. Shadow hunters leapt from the dark, and behind them came mercenaries in dark armor, wielding cruel blades. Arrows flew from the wardens, striking the first wave of attackers, but more came, undeterred. Edrin fought with everything he had, standing over Branok's resting form. His hatchet bit into shadow and flesh alike. Fenric fought at his side, his white fur streaked with blood but his fangs never stopping. Galrin unleashed torrents of magic, sending blasts of fire and wind through the enemies, while Selene's arrows struck with deadly precision, each one finding a vital mark. But the enemy was relentless. As Edrin felled another shadow hunter, he looked up and saw Velra advancing directly toward Branok, her dagger glowing with dark energy. With a roar, Edrin lunged to intercept her, but she moved with unnatural speed, slashing at him. He barely blocked her strike with the haft of his hatchet, but the force sent him sprawling. Velra raised her dagger, but before she could strike, Branok's eyes snapped open, burning with golden light. The grove seemed to respond. Trees groaned and shifted, vines shot from the earth, and a great wind howled through the clearing. With a roar that shook the sky, Branok rose to his full height, towering over everyone. The magic of the grove surged through him, and in that moment, he looked like the great bear of legend. Velra stepped back, eyes wide. "No, it's not possible." Branok let out a deafening roar and charged. His paw struck Velra, sending her flying across the grove. She crashed into a tree and fell still, her dagger clattering to the ground. The shadow hunters faltered at the sight of the enraged bear. Selene's voice rang out. "Now! Drive them back!" The warden surged forward, cutting down the remaining attackers. Galrin's magic burned bright, and Fenric chased the fleeing hound into the forest. As the last of Velra's forces fled, silence fell over the grove. Branok stood tall, his eyes fierce but calm. Edrin approached him slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, my friend." Selene joined them, looking around at the battered but victorious defenders. "This is only the beginning. Velra will return, and others like her. But now, they'll know we are not weak." Galrin smiled faintly. With Branok awakened, the forest has its guardian once more. Edrin looked at Branok, and for the first time, saw not just a bear, but a force of nature, a symbol of hope for all of Timberwild. As dawn's light broke fully, over the grove casting away the shadows, a new chapter began. For Branok, for Edrin, and for the wilds they vowed to protect. As dawn crept over Timberwild Forest, golden light filtered through the ancient trees, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. Edrin awoke to the soft murmurs of Galrin chanting an incantation over Branok. The bear lay still, his sides rising and falling in steady rhythm, but his fur shimmered faintly under Galrin's magic, healing energy seeping into his wounded flesh. Fenric stood guard a few paces away, his sharp eyes scanning the clearing. The white wolf had taken the brunt of yesterday's fight, but wore his injuries like a badge of honor. Edrin rubbed the sleep from his eyes and approached Galrin quietly. "How is he?" Edrin asked, his voice hushed as if afraid to break the spell in the air. Galrin didn't pause his work, but gave a faint smile. "He's strong, stronger than even I remembered. The forest's magic is working with him now, healing him faster than I could alone. But his strength alone won't be enough against what's coming." Edrin frowned. "What do you mean?" Galrin let out a heavy sigh, finishing the incantation as soft light faded into Branok's thick fur. Velra wasn't lying. There's a deeper power within Branok, something ancient, something the poachers never truly understood but hoped to exploit. And now that we've defied them, they'll return in force. A sudden crack of a branch echoed through the trees, and Fenric's ears shot up, growling low in his throat. From between the trees, a figure emerged. An old woman hunched but with sharp, piercing eyes. Her long gray hair was braided with feathers and bones, and her gnarled walking stick thudded on the earth as she approached. Galrin stood quickly, his eyes wide. "Eldra?" The woman gave a toothy grin. "Did you think I would not come when the forest itself calls, Galrin?" Edrin glanced between them, confused. "Who is she?" Galrin bowed his head in respect. "Eldra is a forest witch, a guardian of these lands longer than anyone alive. She hears the whispers of the trees." Eldra's gaze fell on Branok, her expression softening. "So the old king walks again, though wounded. And you, young man." She turned to Edrin, her eyes sharp as knives. "You have bound yourself to his fate." Edrin straightened, feeling the weight of her words. "I couldn't leave him to die." She chuckled softly. "Good. The forest remembers kindness, and it will reward you, or curse you, depending on your path." Galrin stepped forward. "Eldra, we need guidance. Velra is after Branok. She wants his power." Eldra's eyes darkened. "Then you must awaken his true self before she takes him. There is a place, the Heart Grove, deep in the forest where the spirit of Timberwild lives strongest. Take him there, and perhaps he will remember what he was born to be." Fenric barked sharply, pacing. Edrin nodded. "Then we'll go." "Beware," Eldra warned. "The path is guarded, and Velra will surely lay traps to stop you." Without another word, she turned and vanished into the trees, leaving behind only the scent of sage and smoke. With Branok now strong enough to walk, though still limping, the group set out toward the Heart Grove. The journey was treacherous. The deeper they went, the darker and thicker the forest became. Vines hung like curtains, and the sounds of strange creatures echoed around them. At one point, they came upon a glade filled with fog. As they stepped forward, shadows moved within the mist, phantom wolves, their eyes glowing pale blue. Fenric growled but stayed close to Branok. "Don't attack," Galrin whispered. "These are spirits of the forest. They watch us." As if hearing his words, the wolves turned and slipped back into the fog, leaving only their howls lingering in the air. Hours passed as they climbed over fallen logs and waded through streams, Branok's strength slowly returning. Edrin stayed close, helping when the bear faltered. Finally, as dusk began to fall, they reached a wide clearing surrounded by towering oaks. In the center, an ancient tree stood, its trunk massive and twisted, its leaves shimmering like silver in the fading light. The Heart Grove. But they were not alone. Velra stood at the edge of the clearing, her black hound beside her, and a group of armed men behind them. Poachers, their cruel eyes gleaming. "So you made it," Velra said with a cold smile. "But this is where your journey ends." Edrin stepped forward, hatchet in hand. "We're not letting you take him." Velra laughed. "Take him? Oh no, boy. I'm here to bleed him of his power." She raised a crystal shard that pulsed with dark energy. "And when I'm done, this forest will be mine." As she spoke, the poachers advanced. Galrin raised his staff, chanting. Vines burst from the earth, wrapping around the legs of the first attackers. Branok let out a deafening roar and charged, his paws slamming into the ground with thunderous force, sending two men flying. Fenric lunged at the hound, their battle beginning anew. Edrin fought fiercely, swinging his hatchet at the poachers. Galrin's magic flared, sending roots and branches to entangle and strike at their enemies. But Velra was powerful, cutting through the vines with a dagger wreathed in black flames. As Branok fought, something within him stirred. His eyes glowed, faintly, and when Velra lashed out with a spell, Branok stood firm, absorbing the magic into his body. The ancient tree behind them pulsed with light, and a whisper filled the clearing, an ancient voice, like wind through leaves. "Branok, remember!" Branok's roar grew louder, more powerful, and with a burst of energy, his wounds closed. His fur gleamed like burnished copper, and his eyes blazed golden. Power radiated from him, and as he struck the earth with his paw, a shockwave spread out, throwing poachers and Velra off their feet. Velra screamed, scrambling to rise, but Branok advanced on her. No longer the broken bear, but the king of the forest reborn. "No!" Velra shrieked, raising her dagger. But Branok swiped it from her hands, sending it clattering into the roots of the heartgrove tree. She stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. Edrin, bloodied but standing, stepped beside Branok. "It's over, Velra." She glared at them, breathing hard. "You think this is over? There are others who will come for him. For his power." Galrin approached, staff glowing. "Then we'll be ready. The forest protects its own." Velra, seeing no way to win, whistled sharply and her hound limped to her side. With one last glare, she vanished into the shadows of the trees. Silence fell over the grove. Branok stood tall, and Fenric padded to Edrin's side, panting but alive. Galrin smiled. "He has awakened. The forest has its king again." Edrin looked up at Branok, a smile spreading across his bruised face. "Looks like we've got work to do." As the night fell and the stars began to shine through the canopy, the group knew their journey was far from over. But now, with Branok's true power awakened, they had hope, and the forest had its guardian back. The morning sun pierced through the dense foliage of Timberwild Forest, casting long beams of golden light that danced with the morning mist. As the first rays touched the clearing where Edrin, Galrin, Branok and Fenric rested, the forest seemed alive with soft murmurs of birdsong and the distant chattering of small creatures. Yet amidst this beauty, a heavy sense of anticipation lingered. Branok stirred first, rising slowly on his massive paws, the wounds on his body showing signs of healing, though they were still deep and raw. His eyes, dark pools of intelligence and sorrow, scanned the surroundings, alert to any sign of danger. Edrin sat nearby, sharpening his hatchet, his mind restless from the encounter with Velra and the hound. Fenric lay beside him, one ear perked up at every sudden sound, while Galrin prepared a brew of herbs in a small iron pot, his staff resting against a tree. "Today," Galrin began as he stirred the herbs, his voice grave yet calm, "we must reach the Heartgrove. It is the only place where Branok can be truly safe, and where I can call upon the old magic to heal him. But the path there will not be easy. Velra and her hunters will surely have laid traps." Edrin looked up, determination flaring in his eyes. "Then let them come. We've faced worse. Branok deserves freedom." Galrin smiled faintly at the young man's resolve, but his gaze quickly turned serious. "The Heartgrove is protected by the ancients, spirits of the forest that do not trust men. If we approach without reverence, they may turn against us. You must be prepared for what lies ahead." As Branok moved to Edrin's side, nuzzling him gently as if in thanks, Fenric let out a soft growl and stood, tail stiff. From beyond the clearing, there was movement, branches snapping, leaves rustling unnaturally. Edrin and Galrin rose to their feet, weapons at the ready. Out of the shadows stepped two figures, hunters clad in dark leather, armed with crossbows and blades glinting in the sunlight. "Stay where you are," one of them barked, his face scarred from past battles. "That bear belongs to Velra. Hand him over and you won't get hurt." Branok growled, a low rumble that shook the ground beneath them. Edrin stepped protectively in, front of him raising his hatchet. "He belongs to no one. If you want him, you'll have to go through us." The second hunter laughed cruelly. "So be it." Before they could fire, Fenric lunged at them with a snarl, and chaos erupted in the clearing. Edrin charged the first hunter, swinging his hatchet, while Galrin muttered incantations that caused the roots of the trees to writhe and lash out. Branok, despite his injuries, roared and charged, swiping a massive paw at the second hunter, sending him crashing against a tree. The battle was fierce, but brief. With coordinated effort, Edrin and Fenric took down the first hunter, while Branok and Galrin subdued the second. Gasping for breath, Edrin wiped blood from his cheek, looking at Galrin. "We need to move. Now." Galrin nodded. "Agreed. More will follow." Gathering their things, the group pushed deeper into the forest, moving swiftly yet cautiously. As they traveled, the trees grew denser, the air heavier with ancient magic. Strange lights flitted between the trunks, and distant whispers echoed through the mist. Hours later, they arrived at the edge of a vast glade, the Heart Grove. Giant trees rose like pillars, their bark glowing faintly with green luminescence. At the center of the grove, a crystalline pool shimmered, and from its surface rose a soft, pulsing light. Galrin stepped forward, raising his staff. "We seek the blessing of the ancients," he called out into the silence. "This creature, Branok, was wronged by men. We ask your grace to heal him and protect him from those who would do him harm." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from the pool, figures began to rise. Ethereal shapes of animals long past. A great stag, a mighty eagle, a serpent of water. They circled Branok, who stood still, head bowed respectfully. The stag spoke first, its voice deep and echoing. "Why should we grant this boon, human?" Edrin stepped forward. "Because he never asked for this life. He was taken, enslaved, and tortured. All he wants is to be free." The eagle's keen eyes glinted. "And what of you, human? Why do you care for this bear?" Edrin hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I know what it's like to be caged, to have freedom stolen. If I can help him find his, then maybe I'll find mine too." The spirit circled a moment longer, then the stag dipped its head. "Very well. The forest has watched. Your heart is true." With that, the light from the pool surged, enveloping Branok in its radiance. The bear roared, but not in pain. His wounds closed, his fur regrew, and a mighty strength filled his form. When the light faded, Branok stood taller, his eyes clearer and brighter, free from the torment that had clouded them. Galrin sighed with relief. "It is done." But even as they rejoiced, a shadow loomed over the grove. Velra stood at the edge, flanked by new hunters and creatures bound by dark magic. Her eyes burned with fury. "You think you can steal him from me? You've only delayed the inevitable. He is mine," Branok growled, stepping forward, no longer afraid. Edrin raised his hatchet, and Fenric stood at his side, ready. Galrin's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "You will not take him. Not now. Not ever," Velra sneered. "Then prepare to die for him." As her forces charged, the ancients roared to life, their spirits forming shields and barriers. The final battle for Branok's freedom had begun. The grove erupted into chaos as Velra's forces charged. The glowing spirits of the ancients, enraged by her intrusion, surged to meet them, their forms shifting into brilliant shapes of claw, fang, and wing. Branok let out a mighty roar, no longer a victim but a warrior, standing shoulder to shoulder with Edrin and Fenric. Galrin raised his staff high, summoning roots and vines that burst from the earth, tangling around the hunters' feet, pulling weapons from their hands. The ground itself seemed to pulse with life, aiding those who stood to protect it. Velra, however, was no mere mortal. She thrust her hand forward, and dark tendrils of magic lashed out, slicing through the protective branches and sending a wave of shadow hurtling toward Branok. But the great bear, now fully healed and empowered by the ancients, charged through, the darkness with a roar that shattered the spell's hold, swiping at Velra with his massive paw. She barely dodged, snarling in frustration. Fenric lunged at one of the enchanted beasts, a dire wolf bound by Velra's spell. Their battle was fierce, teeth flashing in the dappled light, but Fenric fought with the desperation of one defending his pack. Edrin, meanwhile, faced off against a hunter wielding twin daggers, parrying and striking with swift, precise blows. The forest seemed to watch and guide him, branches nudging aside his enemies' strikes. Galrin advanced toward Velra, chanting an ancient spell. The trees around him began to glow with green fire, and the air shimmered with raw magic. "Velra, you have defied the forest's will long enough. This ends now." Velra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think these woods will save you, old man? I have taken more from them than you know." She hurled another sphere of shadow, but this time Galrin's staff struck it mid-air, dispersing it into harmless smoke. "The forest remembers, and it fights with us." As the battle raged, Branok barreled into a group of hunters, scattering them like leaves before a storm. His strength was awe-inspiring, every movement fueled by the magic of the grove. He fought not just for himself, but for the forest that had embraced him. Suddenly, Velra whistled sharply, and a massive creature emerged from the shadows. A nightmarish beast stitched from the bodies of fallen wolves and bears bound by her dark magic. It roared, a guttural, horrifying sound that made even the ancients pause. "Meet my pet," Velra sneered. "Born from the remains of your precious forest guardians," Branok growled, stepping forward to face the abomination. His eyes met Edrin's, briefly, and in that look was a shared understanding. They would fight together, or not at all. Galrin called to the ancients. "Lend us your strength," the spirits responded, their forms solidifying, wrapping around Edrin and Fenric like glowing armor. Energy surged into Branok, and his roar shook the very sky. The monstrous beast charged, and Branok met it head-on, their massive forms colliding in an earth-shaking crash. Teeth gnashed, claws tore, but Branok fought with newfound power, pushing the stitched beast back. Edrin, seeing an opening, rushed in, hatchet gleaming, striking at the creature's legs. Fenric tore at its throat, and together they weakened the abomination's hold. Galrin channeled a final spell, his staff glowing brighter than ever before. "By the will of the ancients, be gone!" Roots surged from the earth, wrapping around the dark creature, pulling it down. As Branok delivered one final crushing blow, the beast let out a shuddering cry and collapsed, lifeless. Velra screamed in rage. "No, this isn't over!" But the ancients circled her, their forms glowing brighter. "You have desecrated our woods. For the last time," the stag intoned. And with a burst of light, Velra was bound in chains of pure energy, her magic drained away. Breathing heavily, Edrin looked around. The hunters were gone, those who had survived fleeing into the forest. The battle was won. Branok, bloodied but victorious, let out a final roar that echoed through the Heartgrove, a sound of triumph and freedom. Galrin approached Edrin, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have done well, young one." Edrin smiled, faintly, looking at Branok. "We did it together." The ancients gathered before them, their eyes kind. "You have proven yourselves friends of the forest. Branok is free, and so are you." As the morning sun rose higher, casting golden light across the grove, a sense of peace settled over them. Branok at last was home. But as they turned to leave, Galrin looked back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "There are always those who would seek to harm the wild. We must be ready." Edrin nodded. "Then let's protect it, together." With that, the unlikely companions set off deeper into the woods, ready for whatever new adventures awaited. The winds whispered through Timberwild Forest, carrying the scent of earth and rain. As Edrin, Branok, Fenric, and Galrin walked deeper into the woods, the sunlight filtered through the high canopy, casting soft rays that danced upon the mossy ground. Though the battle had been won, a lingering tension remained. The sense that darker forces still lurked beyond sight. "Galrin," Edrin broke the silence, glancing at the old druid. "You said there are always those who wish harm on the wild. Who else would dare after what we faced?" Galrin looked thoughtful, his staff tapping gently on the earth as they walked. "Velra was but a symptom of something greater, lad. Dark forces stir in the far reaches of this land. There are those who seek to bend nature to their will, and they do not work alone." Branok, walking beside them, let out a soft rumble of agreement, his sharp gaze ever watchful. Fenric trotted ahead, sniffing the air, his ears alert. As they passed into a grove of ancient oaks, Galrin motioned for them to stop. Before them stood an immense tree, older and grander than any other in the forest. Its roots stretched out like arms, and its bark glimmered faintly with emerald light. "This," Galrin said reverently, "is the elder tree, a guardian of the forest's heart." Edrin stared in awe. "I've never seen anything like it." The druid approached the tree, placing a weathered hand upon its trunk. "The elder tree watches all. It has stood for centuries, long before men walked these woods. If there are threats rising, it may show us. Galrin closed his eyes, chanting softly. The tree's light pulsed in rhythm with his words. As the chanting deepened, visions began to form within the light. Images of shadowy figures cloaked in black gathered around a dark flame. They spoke in whispers that seemed to slither like snakes, and in their hands, they held chains meant to bind even the fiercest creatures. Edrin's fists clenched. Who are they? Galrin opened his eyes, his expression grave. They are the Blackthorn Circle, sorcerers and hunters who seek dominion over nature itself. They command creatures twisted by dark magic, and they will not stop until the forest bows to them. Branok growled, standing tall. Edrin looked to Galrin. Then we have to stop them. Galrin nodded. Indeed, but we cannot face them alone. We must seek allies. Their next destination became clear. They would journey to the Stonehowl Mountains, where the great wolves dwelled. Fenric, upon hearing this, barked eagerly, his eyes gleaming. The journey was long and treacherous. Days turned to weeks as they traversed dense forests, crossed rushing rivers, and climbed steep cliffs. Along the way, they encountered remnants of the Blackthorn Circle's work, trees scorched with black fire, creatures left twisted and broken, and villages emptied, the people driven away by terror. One night, as they camped near a crystal-clear brink, Edrin sat beside Branok, watching the flames of their fire flicker. "You saved me back there," he said softly, glancing at the bear. "I owe you more than I can say." Branok let out a soft sound, almost like a huff of affection, and nudged Edrin gently with his massive head. Galrin, sitting nearby, smiled at the sight. "Bonds forged in battle are stronger than steel. You are more alike than you realize." Edrin chuckled. "Maybe, but I've got a long way to go before I'm as strong as Branok." The next morning they set out again, reaching the foothills of the Stonehowl Mountains by dusk. As the sun set, a haunting howl echoed through the peaks, the call of the mountain wolves. Fenric responded, his own howl rising to meet them, and soon, shadows moved among the rocks. Wolves, large and fierce, emerged from the mist, led by an alpha with silver streaks in his fur and eyes like molten gold. The alpha approached, his gaze wary but curious. Galrin stepped forward. "I am Galrin of the Timberwild. We seek the counsel of the Stonehowl." The alpha studied them, especially Branok, before speaking in a deep, rumbling voice. "Why do you seek us, Druid?" Galrin bowed his head respectfully. "Because darkness grows in the forests below. The Blackthorn Circle rises. We need your strength to stop them." There was a murmur among the gathered wolves. The alpha's eyes narrowed. "The Blackthorn have sent their shadow beasts against us. Many of our kin have fallen. Why should we trust men to stand with us now?" Edrin stepped forward, his voice strong. "Because we fight for the same forest. Because we won't let them take what belongs to the wild. Branok stands with us, not as a slave but as a brother. If he can trust us, perhaps you can too." The alpha turned to Branok, who stood tall and unafraid. Slowly, the great wolf nodded. "Perhaps you speak true." After a long pause, the alpha raised his head. "Then come, let us speak." Led to a high ledge overlooking the valley, the companions sat among the wolves as Galrin explained all they knew of the Blackthorn Circle. The wolves listened intently, growling when mention of the shadow creatures arose. Finally, the alpha stood. "If we fight to the end. We will not see the forest fall." Edrin smiled. "Then we fight together." But as they planned, a wolf rushed into the circle, panting heavily. Dark ones, approaching from the south. They marched toward Timberwild. Galrin's face darkened. "So soon?" "They move faster than I feared." The alpha looked out over the valley. "Then we meet them in battle, gather the packs." By dawn, an army of wolves and men stood ready. Branok, towering over them all, let out a deafening roar, echoed by Fenric and his kin. As they began their march back toward Timberwild, the forest seemed to stir around them, the ground rumbling faintly, as if the trees themselves prepared for war. As they traveled, Galrin whispered to Edrin, "You've brought together man, beast, and spirit. You've done what many thought impossible." Edrin glanced at Branok and Fenric, then to the wolves marching with them. "I didn't do it alone." Galrin smiled. "No, but sometimes, all it takes is one to start the fire." With the fate of Timberwild, and all its creatures hanging in the balance, they pressed on, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The Heartgrove trembled under the weight of the looming confrontation. Velra's army of hunters and shadow-bound beasts advanced like a dark tide, their eyes burning with malice and greed. Yet, facing them were not only Edrin, Galrin, Branok, and Fenric, but also the mighty ancients, spirits now fully awakened and ready to defend the sanctity of the grove. The spirit of the great stag lowered its antlers, which glowed with a radiant energy, while the eagle spirit circled above, releasing shrill cries that shook the air. The serpent spirit, gliding through the tall grasses, hissed a warning as it coiled protectively around the crystalline pool. Galrin lifted his staff high, his voice echoing through the glade. "You will not take Branok. This forest has declared him under its protection. Turn away, Velra, before you unleash wrath you cannot control." Velra snarled, her hands wrapped tightly around a jagged black staff pulsing with dark energy. "Foolish, old man, you think these spirits can stop me? I've tamed worse. Branok was mine, and I will not leave without him." With a sharp motion, she hurled a dark spell toward Branok, but the stag spirit lunged between them, its glowing antlers absorbing the magic and sending waves of energy rippling across the grove. The air crackled as ancient forces collided. Edrin stepped forward, his hatchet raised, determination burning in his eyes. "You'll have to go through me first, and you'll find that much harder than you think." With a shriek of rage, Velra gestured to her hunters. "Attack! Take them all down!" The clearing erupted into chaos. Hunters fired crossbows and slashed with wicked blades, but the ancients moved with otherworldly grace, deflecting blows and hurling their enemies aside with sheer force of spirit. Branok roared, charging into the fray, swatting hunters aside with massive paws. His strength, now fully restored, was terrifying and awe-inspiring. Fenric fought beside Edrin, teeth flashing as he leapt onto a hunter and knocked him to the ground. Edrin himself moved swiftly, ducking and weaving, his hatchet striking true. Galrin stood back, chanting in a language lost to most, calling upon the forest itself. Trees groaned, and their roots burst from the earth, ensnaring Velra's forces and pulling them down into the soil. Vines lashed like whips, knocking weapons from hands. But Velra was relentless. She sent wave after wave of dark magic at the ancients, her face twisted in fury. "I'll burn this forest to the ground if that's what it takes." Edrin ducked as a blast of shadow magic shot over his head. "Galrin, can you stop her?" Galrin's eyes burned with resolve. "There is a way, but I'll need time and protection." Branok roared and placed himself in front of Galrin, shielding the old druid with his massive form. Edrin and Fenric closed ranks around them. Velra's eyes narrowed. "So you think you can hide behind that bear? He belongs to me." Galrin ignored her taunts and raised his staff high, driving it into the ground. The crystalline pool pulsed violently as the energies within surged outward, filling the grove with blinding light. The ancients began to chant, their voices merging with Galrin's spell. Velra screamed and unleashed her full power. A storm of black tendrils writhed toward Branok and Galrin. Branok roared in defiance and stood tall, ready to meet the darkness, head on. But before the dark spell could strike, the serpent spirit lunged, taking the brunt of the attack. Its form shimmered and twisted as it absorbed the darkness, coiling protectively around the others. The stag spirit turned to Edrin. "You must help us. The bond between man and beast. Only that can sever Velra's hold. You must give Branok his final freedom." Edrin's mind raced. "Tell me how. Your heart and his, as one. You must speak the vow of release." Understanding dawned on Edrin. He turned to Branok, who met his gaze with fierce loyalty. Edrin stepped closer, placing a hand on Branok's thick fur. "Branok, I release you. You are free. from chains, from hunters, from all who seek to bind you. Run wild as you were meant to." As the words left his lips, a shockwave burst from Branok, and the darkness Velra had used to mark him shattered like glass. Branok roared, louder than ever before, a roar that shook the earth. Velra staggered backward, eyes wide. "No!" Galrin's staff blazed with light as he finished the spell. The ancients chanted louder, and together, they bound Velra in chains of pure energy. The hunters, seeing their leader captured, threw down their weapons and fled. Branok turned to Edrin, nudging him gently. Edrin smiled, tears in his eyes. "You're free now, old friend." Velra struggled against the magical chains. "You think you've won? This isn't over. I'll return." Galrin approached her, his staff glowing. "No, Velra. Your time in these woods is done." With a final chant, Galrin struck the ground, and a portal of light opened behind Velra. She was dragged into it, vanishing with a scream as it sealed shut behind her. Silence fell over the grove. The spirits turned to Edrin and Branok, their forms glowing with approval. "You have done well," the stag said. "The forest owes you a great debt." Branok, free of his chains, looked toward the forest, then back at Edrin. With one last, long look, he lumbered toward the trees, disappearing into the wild where he belonged. Edrin watched him go, heart full of both sorrow and pride. Fenric sat beside him, leaning against his leg for comfort. Galrin placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've given him what no one else could. Freedom." Edrin nodded. "And maybe, in doing that, I've found some of mine too." The heart grove glowed with soft light as the spirits faded, returning to their ancient slumber. Edrin, Fenric, and Galrin stood quietly for a time before turning back the way they had come, ready to return to a world that now seemed just a little brighter. But deep in the woods, where the trees grew thick and the rivers ran fast, Branok roamed free, master of his own fate, a legend among the wild things of Timberwild Forest. The sun began its slow descent behind the towering trees of Timberwild Forest, casting a warm amber glow over the battle-scarred Heart Grove. The once tranquil sanctuary now bore the marks of fierce struggle, scorched earth, broken branches, and fading remnants of dark magic that Velra had unleashed. Yet amidst the destruction, a calm began to settle, like the first gentle breeze after a storm. Branok stood tall at the center of the glade, his fur now rich and gleaming under the ancient's blessing. His amber eyes surveyed the grove, filled with a deep, quiet strength. At his side, Edrin rested on one knee, catching his breath after the intense battle. Fenric lay close to him, licking a wound on his foreleg but otherwise unharmed. Galrin stood nearby, leaning heavily on his staff, watching Branok with a proud, knowing smile. The remnants of Velra's forces had been driven away, her dark creatures, vanquished by the combined might of the ancients and the forest's defenders. Velra herself was nowhere to be seen. Whether she had perished or fled, none could say for certain. As twilight deepened, the spirits of the ancients slowly gathered around Branok once more. The great stag, the eagle, and the serpent of water shimmered in the fading light, their forms glowing faintly, illuminating the grove with an otherworldly aura. The stag stepped forward, speaking in its deep, resonant voice. "Branok, noble heart of the wild, you have endured much and shown great courage. The forest acknowledges your pain and your strength. You are now free, bound to no man, and protected by the will of the ancients." Branok raised his massive head, and with a soft rumble that echoed through the trees, he seemed to accept the mantle given to him. His eyes found Edrin, and for a long moment, the man and the bear simply regarded each other, brothers in spirit, bound by shared struggle. Galrin stepped forward, his voice reverent. "Ancients, we thank you for your mercy. May the Heart Grove heal and grow stronger, as will Branok." The eagle fixed its keen gaze on Edrin, speaking with a voice sharp as the wind. "Human, you have risked much for one who is not of your kind. You sought to mend what others have broken. Tell us, now that your quest is fulfilled, what will you do? Edrin stood, leaning slightly on his hatchet, and looked to the ancients with calm determination. I was a man lost in his own pain, but Branok taught me that we all deserve freedom, man or beast. I wish to stay and help heal this forest if you'll allow me. I want to make sure what Velra did never happens again. A ripple of approval seemed to pass among the spirits, and the serpent of water swirled gracefully around Edrin before speaking. Then stay, guardian of the wild. You have earned your place. Branok let out a deep, resonant huff of agreement, and Edrin smiled faintly, bowing his head in respect to the spirits. Fenric barked softly, circling Edrin with a wagging tail, as if understanding that their journey together was far from over. Night fell completely now, but the grove was alight with soft glows from the spirits and the shimmering pool at its center. Around a small fire, Edrin, Galrin, and Fenric rested, Branok lying nearby with his massive form relaxed yet alert. Galrin broke the silence as he stirred a pot of herbs. You've chosen a hard path, Edrin, but a noble one. There are still men out there like Velra who seek to dominate and destroy what they don't understand. We'll have to remain vigilant. Edrin nodded, gazing into the fire. I know, but for once I feel like I'm where I belong, not running from the world, but protecting a part of it. Branok rumbled softly, resting his head on his paws. The firelight reflected in his wise eyes, and in that gaze, Edrin saw the reflection of his own journey. A journey from pain and loss to purpose and hope. Days turned to weeks as Edrin and Galrin remained in the Heart Grove, working alongside the forest to heal its wounds. With the ancients' guidance, they restored what Velra's dark magic had scarred. Branok became a sentinel of the forest, roaming freely and protecting the glades and rivers where he had once suffered. Fenric became a trusted companion, always at Edrin's side, whether patrolling the forest or resting under the stars. Word of Velra's fall spread beyond Timberwild, and the local villages, once fearful of the wild, began to see the forest in a new light. Hunters who had served Velra were driven out or captured, and those who remained learned to respect the balance of nature. One day, as spring bloomed anew in Timberwild, Galrin found Edrin sitting by the crystalline pool, deep in thought. The old mystic sat beside him, silent for a while before speaking. The forest has accepted you, Edrin. You've become more than a mere traveler. You're part of this land now. Edrin nodded. And yet, there's still so much to do. So much to protect. Galrin smiled. That's the way of things. But you won't be alone. Branok watches over the woods. The ancients have their eyes on you, and you've found your own strength. At that moment, Branok emerged from the trees, standing tall and proud. He approached the pool and dipped his head, drinking from its pure waters, then turned to Edrin and gave a soft huff. Edrin stood and placed a hand gently on Branok's shoulder, feeling the warmth of the great bear's presence. Ready to patrol? Edrin asked with a smile. Branok gave a deep, content rumble, and with Fenric bounding ahead, the trio set off into the forest. They moved as one, man, bear, and hound, guardians of Timberwild. As they disappeared into the woods, the spirit's eye of the ancients watched silently from the grove, their glowing forms fading into the air like mist, but their whispers lingered, carried on the wind. Where there is darkness, there shall always rise those who defend the light. And so, in the heart of Timberwild, where shadows had once ruled, a new era of balance and harmony began. Watched over by a man who found his purpose, a bear who reclaimed his freedom, and a forest that would never again suffer in silence.